It's a blessing to be out together this morning. Getting some nice cool weather, and I'm certainly enjoying that. Let's see. We are at Genesis chapter 26. Genesis chapter 26. All right, and on Thursday, we went through the genealogy of. We went through the death of Abraham and his second marriage before that. Went through the genealogy of Ishmael, and then the genealogy of Isaac, which brings us to the story of Jacob. And a couple of things that are important for us to remember from that as we're going forward. Chapter 25, verse 23. The Lord said to Rebekah, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." All right, so this oracle from God declares that the younger child is going to rule over the older child. All right, so God has already chosen, His man out of these two that are in Rebekah's womb. And this continues this theme that we have seen throughout Genesis, by the way, of God's choice in things. We saw that, particularly strongly with Isaac. If it was left up to Abraham, Ishmael would have been the heir. Everything, the promises would have been through Ishmael, and we'd all be speaking Arabic. But it was not left up to Abraham, and God's choice was the unlikely choice, Isaac, the son whom Sarah born to Abraham whenever they were both very old, well beyond their childbearing years. The child which, as the Hebrew writer tells us, essentially died. Abraham received him back from the dead, figuratively, the Hebrew writer tells us, because of the sacrifice. All right, so this is a very unlikely person, and God chooses that unlikely person. The same thing happens here with Esau and Jacob. There are things about Esau that, from a worldly perspective, one would find attractive. In fact, as we're going to see in today's reading, Isaac finds Esau to be the attractive option for being his primary heir. In fact, the whole next, the whole 27th chapter is going to be centered around Isaac wanting to countermand this oracle. Isaac never says it explicitly, all right, that he's opposed to God, that he doesn't want to do what God wants to do. But God has said, the older shall serve the younger. And Isaac, in chapter 27, wants to bless Esau with his spiritual blessing. And instead, Jacob ends up getting it, fulfilling this oracle. All right, so this oracle is important to remember for the reading coming up. It's important to remember the meanings of their names. Esau means hairy. Jacob means heel grabber, which basically means a cheat or a swindler. There's this division in verse 27. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Right, and we noted that the last time that we've heard this kind of description of two brothers, one is this way and the other's a different way. The last time we heard that kind of description in Genesis was Cain and Abel. So bear that in mind as well. That's going to come up again in our reading. Along with this favoritism that Moses tells us about in verse 28, Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, and then we're given some essential background information on Esau, what kind of man Esau is. At the end of chapter 25, verse 29, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. All right, that kind of sets the stage for our understanding of the rest of the interactions between Jacob and Esau. One of the first things that we learn about Esau is that he's a man who despises his birthright. His head's not on straight. All right, so that brings us to our reading this morning in chapter 26, and we'll try to get chapter 27 in as well. Let's pray together. Righteous Father, thank you for the gifts you've given us this morning. Thank you for the cool winter air that you've given us this morning, Father. Thank you for our time together to study from your word. And I pray, Father, that we learn by it, that we're built up by it in your service. Thank you for the gifts you've given us in Jesus. It's in his name that we pray. Amen. All right, chapter 26. Now there was a famine in the land. Now, as we read that phrase, we might think, oh, that sounds familiar. We've heard that before in Genesis. And Moses doesn't leave us to wonder. He tells us what we ought to be thinking about. There was a famine in the land besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. All right, Moses has told us about this famine that happened in the days of Abraham. Y'all remember what that resulted in? What happened during the famine that happened in the time of Abraham? I'll give you a hint. Abraham wasn't called Abraham at this point. He was called Abram. Yes. Yeah, the famine caused Abram to go down to Egypt and to look for food. And while they were down there, as was their custom, they lied to Pharaoh about their relationship. They said that Sarai was just Abram's sister and not his wife. All right, so things are... the setup for this is not too promising. Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. What do we know about Abimelech? Almost exactly the same thing that Isaac's father Abraham, in his first encounter with Abimelech, did exactly the same thing with Abimelech that he did with Pharaoh. All right, so the signs are not good. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I shall be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." All right, this is a really abrupt turn in the story, because we've gotten two really ominous signs from the text to start out with, and then the Lord comes to Isaac and repeats his blessings to Abraham to Isaac. All right, well, let's see where this goes. Excuse me. So Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." For he feared to say, "my wife," thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife will surely be put to death." And Isaac sowed in that land, and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich, and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." All right, so let's stop there for a second. Up to this point, the story should sound very, very familiar to us. So we've already seen this twice with Abraham, and now we're seeing it again with Isaac. This same attempt to trick this foreign ruler because he's afraid that he'll be killed on behalf of his wife. And this time, all right, so in the first instance, Pharaoh takes Sarai in, and Pharaoh says that he took her as his wife, and he was plagued for it. In the second event, Abimelech takes Sarah in, but Moses tells us doesn't know her, doesn't have relations with her. And God appears to him in a vision, and so he's spared. This time, the cue is, the text says, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. And one suspects that Moses means this idiomatically. That there's, again, he doesn't tell us expressly what it is, but whatever Isaac and Rebekah are doing, it is clear to Abimelech, hey, these two are not brother and sister, they are married.
My version says caressing.
Yeah, that's some translations interpret it in that direction. Yeah. That was the same you were going to say?
It says shows endearment, showing endearment.
Yeah, showing endearment. Yeah.
He's doing a lot more than just
Right. So I think, from what I understand, the ESV reflects the Hebrew, that the Hebrew behind this is laughing with Rebekah, but that the meaning is pretty obvious. So like your translations that don't say laughing, that say something like showing affection or caressing, they're not wrong. I think they're interpreting it in the general direction that Moses wants us to interpret it. So Abimelech, again, is spared. And again, just like he challenged Abraham, he challenges Isaac. What is this you've done to us? All right, you could have brought guilt on us. And again, Abimelech warns all of his people against touching the man's wife. All right, so this plays out. We noted, I think in the last chapter, that Isaac's life is kind of like a miniaturized or condensed version of Abraham's life. Right, in the previous chapter, Rebekah was barren, and Isaac prays for her. And what in the life of Abraham, what took several chapters, Moses is boiled down in just a couple of verses for Isaac. And the same thing happens here. The same thing happens to Abraham, and there are 2 whole chapters on this kind of event. 2 separate events, but 2 chapters on it. And here it's boiled down to about a paragraph. All right, but you might remember, in both instances where Abraham pulled this stunt, Abraham comes away much, much wealthier. So Pharaoh gives him flocks. Abimelech gives him flocks. Here, we're not told that Isaac is given flocks, but we are told essentially the same thing, that he ends up prospering. Again, not necessarily what we would expect. But in verse 12, Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. 100-fold harvest is a ridiculously high yield for the ancient world. Very, very high yield. Especially whenever you consider the context. Why is Isaac in Gerar to begin with? What's going on? A period of famine. And he's getting 100-fold yield in a period of famine. Alright, so this is, Moses doesn't leave us to guess. He tells us explicitly, the Lord blessed him. And the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. And he becomes so wealthy that Abimelech sees Isaac as a threat and asks him to depart. Alright, now this is a bit of foreshadowing. Because Isaac, remember, is the chosen son, and the Lord prospers him. He is growing and growing and growing until he becomes so great that the pagan king whose land he lives in, the pagan king becomes afraid and says, this problem has to be dealt with. Alright, that should sound familiar to us. It should definitely sound familiar to Moses' original audience. Because we go to Exodus chapter 1. Keep your finger in Genesis chapter 26. Go to Exodus chapter 1. We'll start in verse 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. Alright. What's happening to Isaac here is a bit of foreshadowing of that. That the chosen people will be blessed so greatly that the people around them will become suspicious and they'll be oppressed on account of it. And that's ultimately what happens. This also might make us think of back whenever Lot separated from Abraham, how their flocks had both become so great that they couldn't, that there was conflict in the land while they were dwelling together. Abimelech is looking to avoid a similar situation, so Isaac goes out. So let's return to Genesis chapter 26, verse 17. So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the names that his father had given them. Alright, so essentially he's laying claim to these wells, not only by doing the work himself, but also by giving them their names that Abraham gave them. Whenever you name something, you claim it in the ancient world. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Esek meaning contention. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also. So he called its name Sitnah, meaning enmity. And he moved from there and dug another well. and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, which means broad places, or room, or space, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. All right, so the Lord repeats his promises to Isaac once more. There's something I want us to notice about this, that the Lord has said both times. All right, look at the way that he phrases it here in this passage. All right, I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. Alright, go back up to verse 4. Verse 3. "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring, as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Right. Isaac is the son of choice, but notice the way that God keeps talking to him. He keeps hanging all of this on Abraham. That he made the promises to Abraham, which is why Isaac is going to receive the promises. And then, who does he say has been obedient? He says it's Abraham that's been obedient. It's not based on Isaac's obedience. This is not based on any of Isaac's righteousness that these promises are coming to him. In fact, I think we would struggle to find a place in the text where Moses really goes out of his way to tell us that Isaac is a particularly righteous person. Now, he's done that several times with Abraham. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness in Genesis 15. Right? But we don't have anything like that for Isaac. At least we've not seen anything like that yet. And, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, perhaps Isaac was experiencing some anxiety with all the arguments, envy, and so on. So
yeah.
He needed some encouragement.
Yeah.
So God reaffirmed, look at your dad.
Yeah.
The promise made to him, the call of his obedience.
Yeah.
Do the same.
Yeah. And I think we definitely see the same thing with Jacob. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's also what's going on with Isaac. With Jacob, as we're going to see, Jacob refers to God as your God, right, whenever he's talking to Isaac. He doesn't claim him as his own. And whenever he goes to Haran, he is going to call God the God of his fathers. But he's not going to claim God for his own. It's not until after he comes back from Haran that Jacob is going to start claiming God as my God. But it seems like over the course of Jacob's life, he has to go through some things. He has to see, I guess, God's protection over him before he's willing to claim God as his own. Perhaps the same sort of thing is going on with Isaac. Up to this point, and I don't have the scripture references off the top of my head, but up to this point when we have seen God referred to in reference to Isaac, we've had phrases like the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. We've seen that, I think, at least a couple of times up to this point. God being referred to as the fear of Isaac. So there is, when you think of what we know of Isaac's life, it wouldn't be surprising to learn that Isaac, suffered from some anxieties, considering what's happened to him. Okay, good observation, Keith. All right, so let's finish up chapter 26. Verse 26. When Abimelech went to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath his advisor and Phicol the commander of his army, Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So we said, "Let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you, and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." So he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. Excuse me. In the morning they rose early, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." So he called it Sheba, which sounds like the word for oath, like Shiva. Excuse me. Let's see. I lost my place here. He called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of that city is Beersheba, or Well of the Oath, to this day. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Excuse me. All right, so
He comes in with his Secretary of State and his Secretary of Defense.
Yes.
And he lays down the law.
More or less, this is similar to what we've seen with Abimelech before. Whenever there was conflict between Abraham and Abimelech, the way that they fixed it, the way they resolved the conflict, was by making a covenant. And you might remember at that same time, Abimelech had brought Phicol the general out with him. Again, almost like like somebody showing up with their bodyguard. It's perhaps meant to be an intimidation tactic. Like, let's make peace, you and I. And that's what happens between him and Abraham, and it's what happens between him and Isaac here. So they ratify the covenant with a feast, they exchange oaths, and they depart in peace. Excuse me. So Isaac now has a place to settle in the land. He has a well that's giving him water. He has peace with the people around him. And then the narrative changes directions all of a sudden. And the focus switches to Esau for just a minute. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Alright, so we talked about this a week or so ago, about Esau choosing poorly with his wives. Remember, Abraham, on his deathbed, tells his servant to go back to Haran to find a wife for Isaac, because he does not want Isaac marrying any of the Hittite women. He also doesn't want Isaac going back to Haran. And that's how he ends up with Rebekah. Right here, Esau is married from among the Hittite women. And there's something else about this as well. Moses just tells us straight out, without any sort of qualifications, that he's married two women, Judith and Basemat, both Hittite women. All right, now there have been, or at least there's been one other prominent example of bigamy up to this point, at least recently, where we're at least given an explanation for what's going on, right? And that's Abraham marrying Hagar, right? Because in that instance, it's clear that at least Sarah wants to treat it less as Hagar becoming a second wife and more as Hagar becoming a concubine so that she can provide Abraham with a child for Sarah. Right, Hagar is Sarah's slave, and she's using her as a slave. She intends to take Hagar's child. And the text refers to Hagar as a wife, and I think legally she should have been afforded the privileges of second wife. But it's not like Abraham just sets out to marry a bunch of women, right? It was a bad idea, what they were doing, but it's at least kind of understandable in the context of the law. You might remember how things go the other direction, right? In the law of Moses, if a man dies and his wife has not borne him any sons, then what's supposed to happen? The brother is supposed to provide a son for his dead brother. There's that concern that a son has to be provided to be heir. And that the law at least provides that you can do something that's kind of extraordinary, right? There aren't, like normally, taking your brother's wife is an abomination, right? If you look in Leviticus, that's considered to be an abomination. The two offenders are to be cut off from the people. They're to be childless. But in that specific circumstance, when a man is lacking a son, the law says no, it's really important that he be provided a son. And so have the brother go in and provide a son for him. All right, now, it's not exactly the same thing going on back in Genesis 16. And again, Moses lets us know pretty clearly this was a mistake on their part. But that at least is the motive behind it. The motive makes sense whenever you understand the ancient mindset about sons, how essential it is to have a son. With Esau, there's nothing like that. He just takes two wives. All right. Now, other than Abraham and Esau here, we have one other example of a bigamist in Genesis up to this point. All right, now after this, we're going to get Jacob, and Jacob is just... I'm honestly still not sure what to make of Jacob and all of his wives in the way the text treats it. But up to this point, before Esau, before Abraham, there's another bigamist that we've read about, only briefly. Pop quiz. Does anybody remember who else in Genesis has been a bigamist? Lamech, the descendant of Cain, whom we read about at the end of Genesis chapter 4. He took two wives, and we noted how flippant Lamech seems to be about everything. Right, Lamech has these two wives, and he comes in one day and he sings them a song about how he's just murdered a young man for striking him. And if there is sevenfold vengeance on Cain, let the vengeance for Lamech be 77-fold. Right, so Lamech is portrayed as this really unsavory character. He's very, very flippant about things that he shouldn't be flippant about. Marrying two women among them. And here we have Esau, who's cast, in exactly the same way. We are told that with no motivation, no reason whatsoever, Esau marries two women, and furthermore, they're Hittite women. And we know that he's been flippant about his birthright already. So Esau is getting kind of cast into the same mold as Lamech. And we remember that Isaac and Esau have been described in the same terms as Cain and Abel. All right, so Moses is building up our expectations for Esau. Things are not going to go well with him. All right, so the last thing we hear in chapter 26 is that these wives made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. It's not a blessing. Yes?
It kind of seems to me this is kind of like a two-verse chapter.
Mm-hmm.
In the chapter, they've been separated from everything else.
Yeah.
Also, another way, he's been going along and building up this gold wall. This golden, beautiful, ornate wall. And all of a sudden, here's this swat, guacamole. Coming against this gold wall is just this, oh yeah, by the way, Esau.
Yeah.
Just really that's how we start conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Esau is definitely meant to be read as a very unsavory character. And putting him in this spot where he does, it's also supposed to reflect on Isaac. Right, because we've just read about Isaac and something bad that he's done, lying about his wife and almost causing a grave sin. And then we'll read some of chapter 27. We're not going to have time to really dig into it. But the narrative is going to shift again. All right, so it's focused on Isaac, then briefly on Esau, and now it's back to Isaac. All right, so as we're reading the story of Isaac, we're supposed to have this information about Esau in mind. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." He answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me. And prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." But Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse upon myself, and not a blessing." His mother said to him, "Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go bring them to me." So he went and took them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared delicious food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth parts of his neck, and she put the delicious food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went in to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" He answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him, and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" He answered, "I am." Then he said, "Bring it near to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you." So he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. All right, we're going to stop there for right now. So I feel like if we finish the chapter up, I'm not going to have time to make the brief comment I want to make. All right, so we noted that Esau, there's a little bit about Esau. It's kind of tucked in the middle of this story about Isaac. Because I think Moses wants us to have this in mind as we're considering Isaac's own life. All right, first off, that Isaac has lied to Abimelech in the same way that his father Abraham did. And now, in chapter 27, Isaac, thinking that he may be on his deathbed, has decided to give out his blessing. And he chooses to give his blessing to Esau. All right, on what basis, by the way? Why does Isaac want to bless Esau? He loved him more, favoritism. What was the favoritism based on? Moses has told us twice now why Isaac liked Esau so much. Yes, because Esau could fix up some tasty food. And that was the basis for Isaac saying that he wanted to bless Esau. Now, you could say, well, it's Esau being the oldest son, which is true. But the text has left us pretty clearly in mind that Esau is not fit for this blessing that he's about to receive. And that Isaac is not blessing him just because he is the oldest son, but that Isaac actually considers Esau to be his favorite because he makes tasty food. And so Isaac wants the promise to pass on to a man that we've just learned is a bigamist who has married 2 Hittite women. Sorry, and did I hear a comment?
It was at Esau's downfall too, because he was hungry.
Yes.
He gave it up. So they both were in that.
Yes, like father, like son. Yeah, because Esau lost his birthright on account of the same thing, thinking with his stomach. So, yeah, very good observation. Yeah, very shallow. Yeah.
One thing we know now, the reason why he may not have all the kitchens off, because like you said, there's something about it. That tells us something.
Yep. All right, so that sets us up for the remainder of chapter 27. We've read about this conflict that goes on in chapter 27, which is not just a conflict between Jacob and Esau, it's also a conflict between Isaac and his wife Rebekah, based on their opposing favoritism of these 2 children. So, any final questions or comments before we close it up for this morning?
I think that the birthright and the blessing is different. One is the firstborn. The other one is blessing because he wanted to give it.
Yes. Yeah, the blessing and the birthright, I think we are supposed to see as 2 separate things. The birthright is just the inheritance of his land, the inheritance of his property. The blessing is going to be more than just, here, take the land. As we'll see, the blessing that Isaac puts on Jacob, meaning to put it on Esau, is different.
Don't you think that Esau probably
Excuse me.
that those things were separate, and maybe that's the reason why he didn't care about giving it away to him? Because
Possibly.
he might be getting a blessing anyway, and birthright.
Yeah. That's possibly a motivation. Yeah. All right. Well, it's time for us to close it up. So, thank you so much for your questions and comments this morning.